The world had been slowly unraveling, but no one had anticipated the horror that would follow. For years, humanity had been battling small outbreaks, isolated incidents, and terrifying reports of people turning into mindless, flesh-eating creatures. But everything changed one quiet morning. It began with an eerie silence, a sudden calm that descended on the world. The media stopped broadcasting, phones went dead, and electricity flickered out. The first signs of the global apocalypse appeared within hours. Undead creatures began emerging in every major city, spreading faster than anyone could comprehend. Panic set in as people realized what they were facing. The dead were walking again. Across the globe, military and governmental systems crumbled as they were overwhelmed. Entire cities were overrun in mere days, leaving only a few survivors scattered in the wreckage of civilization. This was no longer a fight for a single city or country, it was a battle for humanity's survival. And the clock was ticking down. In a secure underground facility known as the Safe Haven, a group of government officials, scientists, and military personnel worked desperately to formulate a plan. They were humanity's last hope, the final bastion in the fight for survival. Among them was Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a scientist specializing in virology, and Colonel Jack Grant, a hardened military leader with years of experience. They were among the few who had witnessed the early stages of the outbreak firsthand and understood the magnitude of the threat. Dr. Carter, whose eyes showed the fatigue of sleepless nights spent working on a potential cure, had been researching the virus that had caused the transformation. She knew that this wasn't just any virus, it was engineered. Something had triggered the rapid decay of the human body and mind, reanimating the dead in a terrifying new form. What they didn't know was why it had spread so rapidly, and who, or what, was behind it. Colonel Grant paced in the command center, studying the maps of major cities that had already fallen. "We have hours, not days," he muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. His team was preparing for what was sure to be the most critical mission of their lives. The Safe Haven was the last known functional outpost, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Reports from satellite feeds and reconnaissance drones painted a grim picture. The undead army was growing by the hour. Massive hordes were forming, their numbers swelling exponentially. If the world had any hope of survival, it rested on one thing: the development of a cure or a weapon that could stop the undead plague in its tracks. "We can't afford to wait much longer," Dr. Carter said as she studied her notes. "If we don't find a solution soon, we will lose everything. I've made some progress with the virus mutation, but it's only a matter of time before the undead adapt even further, becoming resistant to our efforts." Colonel Grant's expression hardened. He understood the stakes better than anyone in the room. The military was their best chance at reaching the epicenter of the outbreak, where the virus originated. But getting there would require traversing the most dangerous, undead-infested landscapes they had ever seen. Suddenly, a siren blared through the facility, signaling an incoming transmission. An operator rushed over to Colonel Grant with a look of grim determination. "It's from the front lines, sir. The city of Atlanta, it's gone." Grant clenched his fists. "How long do we have?" "Not long. The undead are moving faster than we thought. We need to act now, or it'll be too late." The air grew thick with tension as Dr. Carter and Colonel Grant exchanged a look. They knew what had to be done. The countdown had begun, and humanity's survival rested in their hands. "We have one shot at this," Colonel Grant said, his voice steady. "Our mission is clear. We get the cure, and we stop the undead army before it wipes out what's left of us." But there was more at stake than just survival. There was something deeper at play. The undead weren't just a mindless army, they were growing smarter, learning from every encounter. Someone, or something, was orchestrating the chaos. And as they prepared for the final mission, they had no idea who, or what, they were truly up against. As the final preparations for the mission began, the survivors in the Safe Haven grew anxious. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just another military operation. This was a mission with the fate of the world on the line. Colonel Grant stood before the assembled team, briefing them on what lay ahead. His voice was commanding, but beneath the surface, even he couldn't hide his uncertainty. "We have one goal, To reach the epicenter of the outbreak and retrieve the virus data, we need to develop a cure. The stakes couldn't be higher. The undead army isn't just growing, they're evolving. What we face out there is unlike anything we've encountered before. Dr. Carter stood at his side, her face pale but determined. The virus mutates quickly. We've observed how it spreads differently in different environments. If we can understand its origins, we can reverse engineer it and maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to stop it. The plan was simple in theory but daunting in execution. They had identified a research facility in the heart of what used to be Atlanta, a city now consumed by chaos. Satellite images revealed a strange signal emanating from within the heart of the ruins. Whatever the source of the outbreak was, it had originated there. The team would have to travel through the wreckage of Atlanta, now a zombie-infested hellscape, navigating through the dense horde of undead, all while trying to uncover the secrets behind the outbreak. Grant's tactical team, highly trained in urban warfare, was ready for the journey. They were armed with the latest weapons and gear, but there was no preparation for what lay ahead. The undead weren't just random stragglers, they were organized. They moved with purpose, and there were whispers among the survivors that something else, something far darker, was controlling them. The convoy of soldiers, scientists, and engineers loaded into armored vehicles and prepared to leave the safety of the safe haven. Grant stood at the front of the convoy, his face grim as he surveyed the group. Remember, this isn't just about fighting zombies. It's about survival. Stay sharp. Stay alive. The vehicles rolled out, the gates of safe haven closing behind them, locking them into a mission they might not return from. As they traveled through the desolate landscape, the world outside the compound was a ghostly shadow of what it once was. Cities that had been thriving hubs of civilization were now empty, abandoned, overrun with the undead. Nature had started to reclaim the land, but the silent, rotting remains of humanity lingered as a grim reminder of what had been lost. It didn't take long for the first sign of danger to appear. As they neared the outskirts of Atlanta, the sound of shuffling feet could be heard in the distance. A horde of zombies appeared, slowly but surely, as if they had been waiting for the convoy to arrive. "We've got company," one of the soldiers muttered, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Get ready," Grant commanded. "This is where we separate the survivors from the doomed." The convoy halted as the undead horde crept closer, their guttural moans filling the air. The soldiers disembarked, weapons raised, and formed a protective perimeter around the convoy. Dr. Carter remained in the armored vehicle, nervously clutching a map of the area, trying to focus on the mission despite the chaos unfolding outside. Grant motioned to his team, signaling them to take action. A volley of gunfire rang out, and the undead dropped one by one, their bodies collapsing to the ground. But there were too many. The horde kept advancing, seemingly endless. "We need to keep moving," one of the soldiers yelled over the noise of the gunfire. "We can't hold them off forever." Grant gave the order to retreat. "Fall back to the vehicles. Move out." The team rushed back to the armored convoy, firing on the undead as they went. A few soldiers were left behind, cut off from the rest as the horde surged forward. Grant's face hardened as he saw them fall, their cries drowned out by the relentless undead. There would be no time to mourn them, not yet. Not until the mission was complete. The convoy sped through the streets of Atlanta, weaving through the debris and wreckage. As they drove deeper into the city, the air grew thick with smoke and the scent of decay. The closer they got to the research facility, the more intense the atmosphere became. The undead were everywhere, but they weren't just wandering aimlessly. There was something else, something orchestrated in their movements, a subtle shift in their pattern that unsettled even the most battle-hardened soldiers. "Something's wrong," one of the soldiers muttered. "These aren't just mindless walkers. They're learning." Grant nodded grimly. He had been hearing the rumors, too. The undead were evolving faster than expected. The mutations weren't just physical, they were strategic. And this was only the beginning. As the convoy neared the research facility, a strange feeling crept over them. The walls of the facility were fortified, but the surrounding area was littered with signs of violent resistance. The doorways were blocked, the windows shattered. There were signs of an epic battle here long before the undead took over. Dr. Carter, clutching a data pad in her hands, turned to Grant. "We're close. I can feel it. The answers we need are inside." But as the convoy halted in front of the entrance, a loud, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Something bigger, and much more dangerous, was waiting for them. The air was thick with tension as Colonel Grant's convoy came to a halt in front of the ruined research facility. The sound of the growl still echoed in the air, making the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand up. The undead outside the perimeter had begun to gather, their movements more deliberate than before, as though they had been drawn to this very spot. But it wasn't just the zombies they had to worry about. Grant's eyes scanned the surroundings, noting every detail. The facility had once been a hub for scientific innovation, a place where breakthroughs in medicine and technology had been celebrated. Now, it was a tomb, a silent witness to the horrors that had consumed the world. "Stay sharp," Grant ordered, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "We don't know what's waiting for us in there." The soldiers disembarked, forming a protective perimeter around the convoy. Dr. Carter, despite her fear, took a deep breath and began to lead the way toward the facility's entrance. She clutched the data pad tighter, the device containing the last hopes for a cure. It was strange, part of her felt a sense of purpose in being here, but another part of her wondered if they were too late. The infection had spread so rapidly. Could anything really stop it now? As they approached the main door, a loud crash reverberated through the building's broken walls. One of the soldiers, a young man named Private Walker, instinctively flinched. "What the hell was that?" Walker whispered. Before anyone could respond, a chilling screech pierced the silence, followed by another growl. This one was louder, deeper, almost as if something enormous was moving toward them. The sound of heavy steps, like the thud of a massive creature's footfalls, filled the air. "Get in! Now!" Grant barked, signaling for the team to push forward. The group hurried toward the entrance, entering the dimly lit corridors of the facility. The smell of rot and decay was overwhelming, but the worst part was the sense of dread that hung over them. Something was watching them. Inside, the facility was a maze of narrow hallways, cluttered offices, and research labs, all in disarray. Papers and shattered glass littered the floors. But the most unsettling sight was the walls, covered in strange, cryptic markings that resembled symbols and sketches of the undead. Dr. Carter, now visibly shaken, moved quickly, leading them deeper into the complex. "It's here," she murmured. "We need to find the lab. The virus data is stored in the main server room." Grant nodded, signaling his team to spread out. "Clear every room. We don't know what's waiting for us." As the soldiers swept through the building, the air grew colder. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the facility itself was alive, with every creak of the floorboards and groan of the walls sending a shiver down their spines. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon the first sign of resistance. A lab door had been forcefully breached. Inside, a scene of horror awaited them. The room was covered in blood, and what remained of the research team was strewn across the floor, their bodies mangled and torn. In the center of the room, the glowing light of the main computer flickered weakly. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Matthews, moved toward the computer. "We've got access. This might be it." But before anyone could react, a terrifying roar echoed from the depths of the facility. It was a guttural sound, inhuman, as though something monstrous had awakened. "Get to the server room, now!" Grant shouted. The team moved quickly, knowing that whatever had made that sound was closing in on them. As they rounded the corner to the server room, they found the door locked, but the lock was no match for the soldiers' tools. They forced their way inside, revealing a large room filled with data terminals and servers. Dr. Carter rushed to the central console, frantically typing in commands. "This is it," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "If I can access this, we'll have everything we need to stop the virus." But as her fingers flew over the keys, another growl erupted from the shadows. This time, the sound was accompanied by the heavy crash of something enormous barreling through the hallways. "Move it!" Grant shouted, pulling Dr. Carter to safety as the soldiers formed a protective line in front of the server room. They could hear the creature getting closer, its steps shaking the foundation of the building. Suddenly, the door to the hallway exploded open, and the monstrous figure they had been hearing revealed itself. It was massive, towering over them, its twisted form a grotesque parody of humanity. Its skin was decayed and mottled, and its eyes were a sickening shade of yellow, glowing with malevolent intelligence. This wasn't like the other zombies, they weren't mindless, this one was different. It let out a deafening roar as it charged forward, its clawed hands swiping at the air. The soldiers opened fire, but the creature didn't seem to slow down. It was too strong, too fast. It was a new breed of undead, and it was terrifying. "Fall back!" Grant yelled, pulling Dr. Carter toward the back of the room as the team fired everything they had at the creature. But the thing kept coming, shrugging off bullets like they were nothing. It was relentless, its roars echoing through the building as it pursued them. "We can't fight this thing," Sergeant Matthews shouted, panic rising in his voice. "It's too strong." Dr. Carter's mind raced. "We need to stop it, or we'll never get the data." Grant looked at the creature, then back at the server room. They were trapped. But there was no other choice, they had to get the data, or all hope would be lost. The creature's roar echoed through the corridors like a death sentence. It was massive, an abomination of twisted flesh and bone, its very presence radiating an aura of death. Every soldier in the room opened fire, their weapons unleashing a barrage of gunfire, but the creature barely flinched. It was like shooting at a wall of steel. Grant's mind raced as he watched the creature barrel toward them, knocking over everything in its path. The other zombies in the building, sensing the chaos, began to gather outside the server room. The walls groaned under the weight of their sheer numbers. It was clear they were surrounded, with no clear escape. "We can't hold out forever," Matthews shouted, his voice frantic. Grant clenched his jaw. He knew they were running out of time. Dr. Carter had to finish her work. The data they needed was within reach, but with the creature bearing down on them, it seemed impossible. "Hold the line," Grant shouted, turning to his team. "We've got one chance to make it out alive. We need to keep this thing off Dr. Carter until she gets the data." He motioned for a few soldiers to fall back, creating a defensive perimeter around the server room. They continued firing, but their shots had little effect. The creature was nearly upon them. Dr. Carter, trembling but determined, worked frantically at the central terminal. She was typing in commands, her fingers moving faster than her mind could process, desperately trying to unlock the data that would save humanity. Sweat poured down her face as the weight of the situation pressed on her. The world was depending on her to succeed. "I almost have it," Dr. Carter said breathlessly, her voice cracking under the pressure. The sound of the creature's claws scraping against the walls grew louder as it closed in. With each passing second, the tension in the room mounted. Grant's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to let fear take control. If they were going to survive, they had to keep fighting. Suddenly, the beast lunged, its claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. One soldier, caught off guard, was thrown across the room, his screams swallowed by the creature's roar. The others scattered, firing at the beast's face, trying to find any weak spot. But it was like attacking a brick wall. Grant's mind raced. They needed to do something, anything, to slow it down. He spotted a set of emergency explosives mounted on the wall, designed to clear debris in case of a building collapse. He grabbed one, quickly assessing the situation. The timer on the explosive was set for 30 seconds. It was their only shot. "Matthews, cover me," Grant shouted as he sprinted toward the explosives. Matthews, struggling to stay calm, fired off another round at the creature's face, but the monster barely seemed to notice. "Got your 6, sir," he yelled. Grant reached the explosives, his hands shaking as he attached the device to a nearby structural beam. He glanced back at Dr. Carter, who was still working at the terminal. I'm almost there, she called out. The creature, enraged, whipped its head around and charged, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. But before it could reach Grant, Matthews hurled a grenade directly at the beast's chest. The explosion rocked the room, sending the creature staggering back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. It was relentless. With only seconds left, Grant activated the timer on the explosives. "Get ready," he yelled. The creature roared, charging forward once again. But just as it was about to reach the team, a deafening explosion filled the room. The walls shook, and debris rained down as the blast knocked the creature off its feet, sending it crashing to the floor. For a moment, everything went silent. Grant, still on his feet, quickly turned to Dr. Carter. "Did you get it?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide with exhaustion but determination. "I did," she said, her voice steady. "The data's ready. It's a blueprint for a cure, and it's all right here." Grant's heart soared with a brief glimmer of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by the growl of more undead just outside the room. The explosion had drawn the attention of the horde, and the building was now swarming with zombies. They didn't have much time. "Move out," Grant ordered. "We need to get to the evac point, now." With Dr. Carter clutching the data tightly, the team began to make their way through the crumbling facility. The explosion had created a path, but it was short-lived. The undead quickly regrouped, their relentless pursuit making it clear that the team wasn't safe yet. "We can't outrun them," Matthews shouted, his breath heavy. "We fight our way out," Grant replied, determination hardening in his voice. "We've got the cure, now we just have to make sure it gets out of here." As they fought their way through the facility, every corner was a new nightmare. Zombies lunged at them from the shadows, and the building seemed to groan and collapse around them as the undead closed in. But Grant's focus never wavered. They had a mission. And they couldn't fail. They reached the emergency exit, only to find it blocked by a barricade of fallen debris. The sound of the undead was getting louder, their moans echoing through the hallways. The team had no choice but to push forward, using whatever tools they had to clear the blockage. "We're running out of time," Dr. Carter said urgently, glancing over her shoulder. Grant turned to the team. "Push through. We're getting out of here with that data. We're not going to let it be in vain." With a final, forceful push, the team cleared the exit. They spilled into the night air, but the battle wasn't over. The undead were everywhere, their numbers overwhelming. The world outside the facility was a landscape of chaos. The night sky was filled with the acrid smoke of burning ruins, and the distant sounds of undead growls and groans echoed through the streets. The convoy was long gone, leaving only the shattered remnants of the once thriving city in its wake. The team stood at the threshold of the facility, weapons ready, but their chances of surviving the next few moments seemed slim. The horde was everywhere, closing in quickly, their faces twisted in a grotesque parody of hunger. They shuffled and dragged themselves toward the survivors like a flood, with no thought but the instinct to devour. Grant's heart raced as he scanned the scene. There was no longer any sense of direction. The only path to survival was the narrow alley ahead, but even that was swarming with zombies. He turned to his team, sweat beading on his forehead. "We need to get to the extraction point. If we don't move fast, this will be our last stand," he said, his voice low but urgent. Dr. Carter clutched the data tightly, her fingers trembling. "I can't believe it. We're so close to a cure, but I can't help but feel like we're out of time." "Focus," Grant said sharply. "You have the data. Now, let's get it out of here." Matthews, the soldier who had helped clear the explosive barrier, took point. His eyes flicked nervously over his shoulder as he surveyed the horde. "We can't keep fighting like this, Colonel. The streets are crawling with them." Grant nodded grimly. The sound of the approaching zombies grew louder, and the odds of survival seemed to shrink with each passing moment. "Then we'll fight our way out. No choice. Move, move, move," Grant shouted, signaling to his team to begin their trek through the alley. The team moved quickly, making their way through the dimly lit street, narrowly avoiding swarms of zombies that shuffled down the main road. But it wasn't enough to escape unnoticed. The creature's heightened senses soon caught their scent. A few stragglers began to shuffle in their direction. The soldiers fired a few warning shots, dropping the first wave of zombies, but more followed. And more. They couldn't afford to waste time. Every minute counted. Grant's mind worked furiously. We need to get to the rooftops. If we can get higher ground, we can make our way to the extraction point safely. He gestured toward an abandoned building ahead. The structure was barely standing, but it might give them the height they needed to keep the undead at bay. The soldiers moved quickly, scaling the dilapidated stairs and reaching the rooftop. The air was thick with the smell of decay and destruction as the team positioned themselves on the edge, weapons raised. The view from the top was horrifying. The city sprawled out before them, once a symbol of human achievement, now a broken wasteland overrun with undead. Fires still raged in the distance, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. The streets below were choked with zombies, their bodies a mass of writhing limbs. "Where's the extraction point?" Dr. Carter asked, her voice strained as she peered through binoculars. Grant scanned the area, then pointed toward a distant building on the far edge of the city. "There. The military should be holding a landing zone there. But it's going to be a hell of a fight to get there. We'll have to make it through a heavily infected area." Private Walker, one of the younger soldiers, looked over the edge nervously. "How are we supposed to get through all of that?" His voice was trembling, and it was clear the young man was shaken. Grant gave him a hard look. "We do it together. We stay focused, and we fight our way to that point. We don't have any other options." The sound of the horde moving below them was growing louder, their shuffling feet and moans mixing with the sounds of distant explosions. Every minute, more zombies gathered in the streets below, turning the city into a living nightmare. "Colonel!" Matthews shouted, his voice strained with urgency. "There's something else coming from the west. Something big." Grant turned quickly, looking to the horizon. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a distant shadow in the darkening sky, but as it grew closer, the shape became unmistakable. A massive, lumbering beast, a creature unlike any zombie they had ever encountered, emerged from the dark streets. Its grotesque form was far larger than anything they'd faced before, and it was moving with terrifying speed. It wasn't the creature they had fought in the research facility, but it was something equally monstrous. Its arms were twice the size of a normal person's, and its body was covered in patches of sickly, inflamed skin. It was the evolution of the undead, a new breed of terror that wasn't just a zombie anymore, it was a weapon. This isn't good," Matthews muttered, his face pale as the creature charged toward the building. Grant didn't hesitate. "We need to move now. We'll have to outpace it. It's faster than the others." The team began running across the rooftops, jumping from one building to the next, each leap growing more dangerous as the buildings around them crumbled under the weight of time and decay. Behind them, the horde of zombies surged forward, their eyes fixed on the survivors. But the creature from the streets was closer now, gaining on them with terrifying speed. Its roars filled the air as it reached the base of the building they had just crossed. The ground shook with each step it took. "We won't make it unless we push harder," Grant shouted, adrenaline surging as he increased his pace. The team kept moving, but with every step, the monster grew closer. The streets below had become a death trap, filled with zombies. The air was thick with smoke, the remnants of the city falling apart around them. Suddenly, they reached a gap between two buildings. It was a long jump, but the only way forward. Grant didn't think twice. He took a running start and leaped over the gap, landing hard on the opposite roof. The others followed quickly, but Private Walker hesitated. "Walker, move!" Grant shouted. But it was too late. The creature was upon them. The creature roared, its grotesque form now mere feet from the edge of the building. Its massive arms swiped through the air, knocking debris and dust into the air as it prepared to pounce. Walker, frozen by fear, stood at the edge of the gap, too terrified to move. "Walker, jump!" Grant shouted again, his voice strained with urgency. There wasn't time to hesitate. The creature was closing in. Walker's eyes were wide with terror, his body trembling. The distance between him and safety seemed impossibly far, the gap between buildings looking like a chasm. He looked back at the creature, which was now leaping toward the ledge, its claws extended and dripping with what could only be the blood of its latest victims. "Jump!" Matthews screamed, already halfway across the gap. But Walker remained rooted to the spot. Time seemed to slow as the creature's claws scraped against the edge of the building, its hideous mouth opening wide in a snarl. Then, with a terrifying screech, it lunged. Grant's heart raced as he saw Walker's wide-eyed panic. It was now or never. "Walker, jump now!" Grant bellowed, his voice a mixture of command and desperation. The young soldier seemed to snap out of his stupor just in time. With a desperate cry, he threw himself toward the gap, his legs pumping as he launched into the air. For a brief moment, everything seemed to hang suspended in the air, the creature, the building, and the team watching in dread. Then, with a sickening thud, Walker landed on the opposite roof, his body slamming into the wall. He let out a strained gasp, his knees buckling beneath him, but he was safe. For now. The creature, enraged by the narrow escape, howled in fury. It slammed its fists against the building, shaking the walls and sending debris raining down on the team below. "We're not out of the woods yet," Grant said, breathless, already moving to the edge of the building to look ahead. "We need to get to that extraction point. Now." The team scrambled across the rooftops, each step a battle against exhaustion and the ever-present threat of the undead below. They didn't dare stop to catch their breath, knowing that the creature and the horde would be right behind them. The sound of its heavy footsteps grew louder, filling the air as it pursued them across the ruined city. Grant's mind was consumed with a single thought: they had to make it to the extraction point. They had no other choice. They had the cure. They had the data. But if they didn't make it out of the city alive, it would all be for nothing. As they reached the final rooftop, Grant could see the landing zone in the distance, just a speck on the horizon. It looked so far away, but it was their only shot at survival. The sounds of the creature's roars, mingled with the chorus of zombies in the streets below, kept pushing them forward. The team continued to move at a fast pace, not pausing for a second. Matthews was the first to reach the edge of the building, where the alleyway below opened up into a wide street filled with a mass of undead. "Down here!" Matthews shouted as he jumped onto the fire escape that clung precariously to the side of the building. "We can cut through this way. It'll get us closer." Grant hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. "Everyone down." One by one, the team descended the fire escape. The undead were closing in from all sides, their growls echoing in the streets like a tide of death. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath them trembled as more and more zombies gathered in their path. But the escape route was their only hope. As the team reached the bottom, they darted into the narrow alleyway, keeping low to avoid attracting attention. The horde was everywhere, but with each turn and each narrow street, they moved closer to the extraction point. Grant could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every sound, every shadow, made him tense with anticipation. They were almost there. But the creature was still behind them, and its fury seemed endless. The team crept along the alley, hearts pounding in their chests. The distant sound of helicopter blades whirring to life made Grant's stomach tighten. The extraction was coming. But would they get there in time? Suddenly, the sound of something crashing into a nearby dumpster caught their attention. Before anyone could react, a group of zombies emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. The team opened fire, but the sheer number of undead made it difficult to keep them at bay. "Go, go, go!" Grant shouted, pushing forward with all his strength, taking the lead. "We're almost there." They kept fighting, using every last ounce of energy to hold the zombies off. But the horde wasn't the only threat now. The creature had caught up to them. With terrifying speed, it slammed into the alleyway, its massive body crushing anything in its path. The ground shook with every step it took. Grant's team pushed forward, firing into the oncoming zombies, but it was a race against time. The creature was relentless, and the undead were closing in from every side. "Take cover!" Grant shouted, motioning toward a nearby abandoned building. They took refuge inside, but it was clear that the building wouldn't hold for long. The undead were pouring into the street outside, and the creature was still hunting them. The air was thick with dust and fear. Matthews ran to the window, checking for the helicopter. "They're close. We can make it." Grant nodded, determination in his eyes. "We're not stopping until we're on that helicopter. Let's go." The team regrouped and prepared for one last push. They had the data. They had the cure. And they were not going to let it slip away now. The sound of the creature's monstrous growls reverberated through the cracked walls of the abandoned building. It wasn't far away now, and neither were the horde of zombies that relentlessly shuffled toward the survivors. The team knew that time was no longer on their side. The helicopter, humanity's last hope, was just moments away from lifting off, but they had to get there before the undead army overwhelmed them. Grant's grip tightened on his weapon, his mind focused and steady despite the chaos closing in on them. The data Dr. Carter had was the key to saving humanity, and he couldn't afford to fail now. The team's survival depended on getting to that extraction point, and they had to make it past the remaining hordes. Matthews glanced over his shoulder nervously, his voice low. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before that creature reaches us. The helicopter can't wait forever." Dr. Carter, clutching the fragile data like it was the most precious thing in the world, nodded grimly. "We're close. Just keep pushing forward." The building they'd taken refuge in was a hollow shell, with large chunks of debris scattered across the floor. Through a crack in the wall, they could see the distant landing pad. At least, they hoped it was still clear. With each passing second, the swarm of undead grew larger, and the monstrous creature's roars grew louder, more menacing. "We need to move now," Grant said, motioning for everyone to get into position. They moved quickly, careful not to make too much noise. As they stepped out into the alleyway, the night air hit them with a suffocating wave of heat and smoke. The sounds of the undead were deafening now, and their presence was everywhere, swirling around them like a never-ending storm. It was clear that the horde was everywhere, shuffling down every street, waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Stay sharp," Grant ordered. "No stopping. No hesitating. We fight our way through." They moved in a tight formation, every sense on high alert. The street ahead was filled with the grotesque figures of the undead, stumbling and groaning, their eyes fixated on the survivors as they drew closer. The plan was simple: survive and reach the helicopter. It was the only way to ensure that humanity had a chance of surviving the apocalypse. The first wave of zombies came at them fast, shuffling through the streets like an unstoppable wave. Gunfire echoed through the air as Matthews opened fire, clearing a path for the team. But it wasn't enough. More zombies appeared from around every corner, filling the streets with their terrifying numbers. Grant's team fought fiercely, but it was clear that they couldn't keep this up for long. Every shot that rang out was one less round in the chamber, and every zombie they dropped was replaced by another. There was no time to waste. "We can't keep this up," Walker yelled, his voice frantic. "There's too many. Just keep moving." Grant snapped back. "We're almost there." The team pushed forward, their legs burning from exhaustion, but adrenaline kept them going. The helicopter was within sight now, its silhouette visible against the backdrop of the burning city. It was the only hope they had. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the street. The creature had caught up with them. Its massive form loomed above the survivors, its monstrous claws reaching for them with terrifying speed. Grant turned in time to see the creature's claws swing down, crashing into the street with an explosion of rubble. The force of the impact shook the ground beneath them, knocking them off their feet. Zombies were thrown aside like rag dolls, but the creature didn't care. It was focused on its prey, the team. "Get up! Move!" Grant shouted as he scrambled to his feet. The creature bellowed, swiping at anything in its path. Matthews fired his weapon at the monster, but it barely phased it. The creature was too large, too powerful. The team had no choice but to run, hoping to outrun it for just a little longer. The helicopter, their salvation, hovered in the air above them, the rotor blades slicing through the thick smoke. Grant could see the military personnel on board, their faces tense as they waited for the survivors to reach them. "We're almost there," Dr. Carter cried out, her voice full of desperation. "Keep moving." The team sprinted toward the extraction point, ignoring the horror surrounding them. The creature roared again, its monstrous form crashing down behind them. They could hear the sounds of the undead gathering, their growls growing louder with each passing second. It was a race against time. Every moment counted. Just as they reached the landing zone, the ground beneath them trembled. The creature had launched itself into the air, its massive body landing with a thunderous crash. It was too close now. The team had no choice but to make one final dash toward the helicopter. "Get inside," the pilot shouted over the loudspeakers. "Now!" Grant grabbed Dr. Carter's arm, pulling her into the helicopter first. The rest of the team followed, leaping onto the aircraft as it began to ascend. But just as the helicopter took off, the creature lunged forward, its claws just grazing the tail of the helicopter. The team heard the deafening screech as the beast's claws scraped against metal, but it couldn't stop them. They were airborne. The creature stood below, roaring in frustration, but it was too late. The survivors had escaped. Breathing heavily, the team collapsed into their seats, staring out of the helicopter windows at the city below. The devastation they left behind was unimaginable. The streets were filled with the undead, and the creature they'd narrowly escaped was still there, a symbol of the horror they had endured. But for the moment, they were alive. "We did it," Matthews said, his voice shaky with relief. "We're out." Grant looked at the horizon, his mind racing. The fight wasn't over. They had escaped, but the war against the undead was far from won. The data they carried could change everything, but only if humanity had the strength to survive long enough to use it. For now, though, they were safe. The helicopter soared higher into the sky, the city below a burning wreckage of twisted metal, shattered glass, and lifeless streets. The wind howled outside, but inside, there was an eerie calm. Grant stared out the window, his mind racing. They had escaped the city, yes, but the weight of what lay ahead was heavy on his shoulders. They had the cure, the data, humanity's last hope, but what would they do with it? Could they get it to the right people in time to save what was left of the world? Dr. Carter sat quietly beside him, clutching the briefcase containing the precious information. Her fingers trembled as she absent-mindedly ran them over the case's surface, still in disbelief that they had made it out. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." Grant didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the clouds. The world, for all its horrors, was still turning. Somewhere far below, there were survivors, other pockets of resistance, people who hadn't given up. But as the sun rose over the wasteland they had left behind, it was impossible to deny that the world had changed forever. "It's not over," Grant finally said, his voice low but steady. "Not by a long shot." Matthews, still catching his breath from the harrowing escape, turned to look at Grant. "What do you mean?" "We've got the cure, yes. But it's only a start. The world is crawling with these things. We don't know how many survivors are out there, or how long it will take to get the cure distributed. And there's no guarantee this will stop the mutation, the evolution of the virus. We don't even know if we can save everyone." Walker, his eyes glazed with exhaustion, nodded grimly. "It's like we're fighting against an army that's constantly getting stronger. Every time we think we've made progress, it's like the world throws another curveball." Grant's gaze hardened as he looked around at the team. Each of them was battered, bruised, and worn down by the nightmare they had just endured. And yet, despite everything, they had survived. "We're not giving up," Grant said, his tone firm. "We've got the weapon now. We've got the cure. But we're not stopping here." We'll find more survivors, we'll make contact with the resistance groups. And we'll make sure this gets out to everyone who needs it. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of the fight. Dr. Carter looked up at him, a spark of determination flashing in her tired eyes. You're right. This isn't just about us. It's about the future of humanity. The rest of the team fell silent, each of them reflecting on what had been lost and what still lay ahead. The world they had once known was gone, replaced by a bleak and unforgiving landscape dominated by the undead. But as long as they drew breath, they had a chance to fight back. Minutes passed, and the helicopter continued its flight away from the city, heading toward the extraction zone. From the cockpit, the pilot's voice crackled through the comms. "Grant, we're approaching the rendezvous point. The evac team is ready." Grant looked around at his team one last time, their weary faces reflecting the same resolve that burned in his own heart. They had made it this far, and they were not about to let it all be for nothing. "All right, everyone. We've got one last step to take," he said, standing up and moving toward the back of the helicopter. "Once we land, we need to get this data into the right hands, no matter what it takes." The team nodded, each one standing up, ready for the final leg of their journey. The helicopter descended, the sounds of the rotors echoing in the early morning air. Below, a large military convoy waited, their vehicles scattered across the landscape. It was a sign of hope, of life continuing amidst the ruin. As the helicopter touched down, the door opened, and Grant stepped out first, his boots crunching against the gravel. The convoy's leader, a grizzled man in military fatigues, approached with a solemn nod. "You made it," he said, his voice heavy with the gravity of their situation. "We did," Grant replied. "Now we need to get to work." The convoy leader's eyes flicked to the briefcase Dr. Carter carried. "Is it really the cure?" "It's more than that," Dr. Carter said, her voice strong, despite her exhaustion. "It's the future of humanity." With that, they began walking toward the convoy's lead vehicle, where a small group of scientists and engineers awaited. The helicopter's engines roared to life behind them, ready to return to the skies, ready to continue its journey, whatever that might entail. As the convoy pulled away, Grant took one last look at the horizon, where the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the wasteland. The world was still broken, still filled with dangers, both seen and unseen. The creatures, the monsters, and the infected were not the only enemies humanity faced. The real fight would be for survival, for rebuilding, for redemption, for hope. But as long as they fought, as long as they moved forward, there was a chance. And that chance was enough. "We fight on," Grant muttered to himself. "And we rebuild." End of story.